Welcome to The Clean Slate, a podcast where we chat about facilities management, commercial cleaning, and keeping the working world safe, clean, efficient, and free from risk. I'm your host, Trista Sobek. Hi, and welcome to The Clean Slate. Today on the show, we have Lisa Greenfield, who is an air quality specialist at ErLab USA. She's in education, so she works really hard to educate folks and facility managers about air quality and how to manage their air quality, as well as monitor it and make sure it is safe for everybody. We had a really great discussion, and I hope you're excited to find out which are the most dangerous industries to work in when it comes to air quality, and where some of the surprising places that you find bad chemicals that are hiding that will make people sick. So continue listening for some information from Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Welcome to The Clean Slate. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Trista?
I'm well. Just recovering from some eye surgery. I had a detached retina issue. It's a little red here still.
Wow.
I don't recommend having a detached retina.
No, but how did that happen?
I don't know. It's just because I have a bad prescription, a bad astigmatism. So after time, it just kind of too much pressure, and it just says, I'm gonna partially blind you a little bit. So
oh my gosh.
Yeah. But I'm much better. So if there's any like red there, it's not because I look like I've been beaten up. So tell us your name, what you do, and I'm really interested in your experience and how you got to where you are now and what you do. So just introduce yourself to our listeners, and then talk a little bit about how you got into what you're doing right now.
Okay, great. Well, I'm Lisa Greenfield. I am the National Indoor Air Quality Specialist with ErLab USA. And I have just been with them now for not quite 3 months, but was familiar with their product prior to coming on board. I'm loving it, and really, I really enjoy being in this space. It's so important that we talk about indoor air quality. It's something that we typically don't think about unless we can see it, like, when there's wildfire smoke. That's been a big issue recently with the Canadian fires. And so COVID, unfortunately, was a big wake-up call for us when it comes to indoor air quality, disease transmission. Of course, all of those things were happening before, but it just kind of made us more aware of what's going on in our environment. I spent almost 20 years in the field of education, taught in lots of different kinds of schools and environments. And one of the things that was across the board was children, are super spreaders of illness simply because they don't really practice hygiene very well. And when you have a lot of them in a small space, you're going to have accumulation of air pollution, whatever that may be, CO2, viruses, you name it. So don't get me wrong, I love children. I have 2 sons of my own and a 2-year-old granddaughter. So I love kids. And that's why I'm doing what I do now, simply because, it is so important to be in indoor spaces that we spend 90% or more of our day in. And that indoor space, the air can be 2 to 5 times more polluted, sometimes 100 times more polluted, depending on what's going on in there, compared to outside air. So anyway, long story short, that's kind of how I got here, and excited to be here today to share with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so for those listening, just thinking out loud, the letters IAQ, that's kind of what is another big buzzword right now in facility management, and what we're talking about, which is indoor air quality. And so you shared with me, and if you don't want to share this, that's fine, but that you were a teacher, and as you mentioned, you were in education, and you found yourself falling ill over and over again. And that was because of the indoor air quality of where you were teaching.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely was. When you're sick, it makes life a whole lot harder to just do the regular things. And so one thing that you want to do is feel better. And so you start looking for help, and really kind of pushed me into learning more about indoor air quality, simply because, I was having breathing troubles. I'd never had asthma before, and developed asthma to the point of being dependent on an inhaler. And really through my own research, I figured out that it was due to moisture issues, which equates to mold. And I think a lot of misconceptions about mold is, it has to be black mold to be toxic. And that's not true, because any kind of mold can be toxic, depending on how much of it there is and how long you're exposed to it, and what your sensitivities are. So if you're allergic, you're going to be more sensitive, which I was. So yeah, long story short, when you have a lack of ventilation or adequate ventilation, and you have moisture that's not being moved away from the building, you're going to have mold issues. And those are really hard to mitigate as well as remediate. And so that was my first aha experience for environmental factors. But when you're teaching, you're around sick kids all the time, so you're often sick yourself.
So you just think you're catching their germs or their viruses over and over and over again.
Yeah, well, and you are, but sometimes there's a lot of schools in buildings as well in our nation that are old. They haven't been updated. The facilities have moisture issues, leaky roofs, ancient HVAC equipment, you name it. So there's lots of variables that can cause poor indoor air quality beyond just the people inside the space.
Right. The Clean Slate podcast is brought to you by OpenWorks Facility Management, the only modern facilities management company that focuses on you, your employees, and making lives easier for those who work in your buildings. The EPA-aligned cleaning methods, combined with small business owner service providers, along with multiple layers of oversight, ensure that no corner is overlooked. OpenWorks is a full-service facility management company. What you need, we can provide. Now back to the show. Well, I'm glad you got to the bottom of your issue, and now you're working with ErLab, educating the public on air quality and the importance of it. I think that's so important. What is besides how can a facility manager, kind of find out that, I think there might be something going on with their air quality here? If they're looking around and they're seeing reports, like what is kind of the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, of this might be an issue?
Yeah. So, it depends on what you're looking for specifically. If you're just looking for air quality in general, say ventilation, if you're wanting to know whether or not you have adequate ventilation for the space, which means you're going to be diluting the air inside, depending on whether or not you're using filtration. Independently, filtration on your HVAC system, or bringing outside air in to dilute the air. Those are all different questions you have to ask, like how am I going to go about asking the questions of like what's actually going on in my environment. And you can do that through IAQ monitors. There's a lot of different types out there. A lot of them are connected to the LOT. You can do real-time monitoring, find out what's going on in a particular area. They're great tools to kind of do a diagnostic. There's, I don't know if you've heard of it or not, or your listeners have, but it's called ASHRAE 241, and it's a code, basically. Sorry, not a code, but a recommendation for ventilation. And so it's to prevent the spread of infectious aerosols. And so it's a diagnostic tool for basically telling you this is the kind of ventilation you need to prevent the spread of infectious aerosols. And so a lot of folks, wanting to know, like, what's my air quality? Well, you need to understand first, do you have adequate ventilation? And you can do that through, there's lots of different ways you can do it, but a real simple way that I recently come to learn about is a company called Poppy, and they can use monitors that they set up and do. It's a pretty quick process where they can do an estimate, assessment of what your ventilation's like. So are you underventilating? So you're having indoor air issues because you have high moisture. Are you overventilating, which is bad for energy consumption, but sometimes good for, sorry.
No, it's not as simple as just like opening up a window, right? I mean, this is like, that's just what I keep thinking. I'm like,
yeah, so that's mechanical ventilation, manual ventilation, air quality. There's so many different variables of the things that can cause poor indoor air quality. So just us breathing creates CO2, which can make it more difficult to attend to what you're doing. It reduces our cognition abilities when it's at a higher level. That's when you can also realize that, oh gosh, there's not enough ventilation in here. I'm probably breathing in my neighbor's air that they just exhaled. And, we know that that's where we get disease transmission. And they say that, like, you breathe in 3% of someone else's air, when you're breathing, when you're in a space like, an indoor
like an office or.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no like short answer to like, monitoring indoor air quality because there's so many variables and depending on the space too. But there's building automation systems now that include assessing the ventilation, the indoor air quality counts. So there's even monitors that include radon, and that's something that we don't talk about very much. Depending on what part of the country you're in, there's chances of it being higher. So it's
what is radon?
Radon is, absolutely. Radon is a gas that comes from the earth. And when we build buildings or dig into the ground, it allows that to come out of the earth. And it's heavier than air, than our ambient air is. And so it just kind of stays where it seeps into. Like if you're in a basement, they have to typically go in and put a fan system in to pull that radon out and send it outside because it won't go on its own. And it's cancer causing. So you can develop lung cancer. It's the second leading cause of lung cancer after smoking. And it's something that is, it's odorless. You can't see it. And it's like it's a silent killer. And it's something that we don't talk about enough. We don't assess enough. And most schools don't even test for it. And so, other than, it depends on what part of the country you're in because different states have different requirements. And So yeah, it's one of the scarier indoor air contaminants that we can monitor for. So,
wow. Another thing to worry about.
yes, exactly.
What do you think? So I would say, when you in your job, what are kind of the more common issues that you see? And what buildings, you mentioned like older school buildings, but I'm thinking like brand new office buildings, it's a spectrum, I would think. So based on that, what is your most common issue that you see?
I would say one of the most common issues is, just exposure to the certain things in the air. So VOCs are volatile organic compounds, and those can be in the form of chemicals that we use to clean. It can be fumes from paint that we use. It can be from our furniture that they use formaldehyde to use press board, and that off gases our carpet off gases. So when you smell that smell when new carpet is being laid down, that's volatile organic compounds, and those go into your body, and your lungs act as a filter to filter them. And some of these things that are in the air, like particulate matter that come from, say, wildfire smoke, are so tiny that they get deep into your lungs, and they can actually cross over into your bloodstream, and they can move throughout your body, and they can cause health effects that are beyond just in the lungs. So, you have asthma, COPD, respiratory illness. Those are all things that happen right in the lungs. Some of these pollutants make their way throughout our entire body and can cause, heart disease and stroke. They're even finding Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and dementia are all attributing to these tiny, tiny particulates that basically gunk up our system that's a highly technical term.
It makes sense to me, Lisa. So gunk up the system.
Yeah. And, we think about too, CO, carbon monoxide. Most people have a carbon monoxide detector in their home. They're not even standard in most places. Why are they not standard if we're using a furnace for heat? You have the combustion. It's time and time again, you see stories about people that are evacuated from buildings or people that die because it is another odorless gas. And it's so subtle that people just think they're getting sleepy or have a headache, and the next thing they're gone. And so that's just another reason why it's so important for us to be monitoring indoor air quality. Yeah.
Yeah. Personally for you, what is I don't know if you have a favorite kind of area that you've gone into and worked with a company, what was it education or was it manufacturing? Or, I would assume if you're in a manufacturing building, there's a lot to do there and uncover, but, what is kind of one of your, you're like, oh, this is a really big opportunity to educate and talk about what's going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my comfort zone space is in education. And for 10 years, I taught in early childhood education. And if you can think that tiny humans, they like to share things, not their toys, but their germs. And that is a place where we found a lot of success in mitigating that, infectious air that has all those germs and viruses in it. So we found a lot of success there. And also ErLab, we began in the laboratory setting to filter the dangerous air in the laboratory. So chemicals and fumes and all of those things that we started out over 55 years ago to address we've moved into overall air quality for the space in general. So that's kind of where we started, but have gone into the other spaces. It's simply, I think for me, I always put education at the top because that's my background, but it's also a place where you think about how many people are in one small space. And you think about like cleaning that much air. It's going to take more than just your regular ventilation or opening a window, because you have all that respiration happening. And you have
here in Arizona, it's 115 degrees sometimes, so you can't open a window or it's not.
Yeah, exactly. And when you have wildfires outside, you can't do that. You can't bring the outside air in. It's going to become more dangerous. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is vulnerabilities. We have like the elderly, we have the immunocompromised, and then you have children. And those folks are the ones that are most susceptible to the negative health consequences of poor indoor air quality, simply because they're vulnerable. And children actually breathe more. So they're respirating more, moving more air through their lungs. And their lungs are actually larger in proportion to their body than adults are. So they're actually moving more air. And if it's polluted, they're being exposed to more of those pollutants than adults are. And they're still developing. They're still growing physically, mentally. And so, again, it's those vulnerable folks who have asthma. They are going to be more susceptible to simply just allergens in the air. So seasonal allergies, they're really bad here right now in Iowa. I have 3 HEPA air purifiers going in my place.
I was going to ask you, does that make a difference?
It does make a difference. Keeping the windows closed, running HEPA air purifiers, highly recommend it. But here's the other problem with keeping the windows closed is like we don't get the fresh air in here. And for so long, we've done the energy efficient thing, which has caused us to become sick and have sick buildings.
Ooh, can you talk a little bit more about a sick building and what that means, and what a facility manager or somebody can do, and how do you notice that? I would assume that's a pretty, aggressive word. It sounds very like, we have an issue here, so what deems a building as being sick? So there's several things, but at the top would be ventilation. If you have poor ventilation, you typically have poor air quality because you're simply just building the levels of pollutants by not filtering them out or moving them out and bringing cleaner air in. Moisture, humidity. If you have high humidity levels and a lack of ventilation, you're going to get mold. And mold tends to cause more health concerns in people that are noticeable, that cause symptoms. And you don't even have to be able to see it. Oftentimes it's hidden. And you don't really know there's an issue until you leave the environment. So for me, I didn't realize it until we went on winter break and my symptoms started to get better. And I was like, wait a minute, something's going on here. But a sick building, can be asbestos, right? That hasn't been removed. There's lead in pipes still in some schools. For their drinking fountain has water that goes through lead pipes. Like there's all kinds of things that make our buildings sick, but those are like the top ones. What do you think? Which industry are that you've seen? Would you say is most? I don't want to say dangerous, but can put more of the average person or even a vulnerable person at risk? Which industry?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think people that are exposed to chemicals that are not fitted with the right PPE. I think folks that work in healthcare have a high risk of exposure. Folks that work in laboratories, people in manufacturing, that there's a lot of airborne debris. They're breathing that in. So, those are the ones that are first in mind, but you also have to think about people who work in education, exposure levels. That way, if you're in a sick building with sick kids, I think there's lots of different variables there when it comes to exposure, but the most dangerous are the chemicals. But if you think about exposure to viruses like RSV and COVID, those can be brought home to vulnerable family members, and those can be deadly, right? So we kind of have to think about there's varied levels of danger in occupations, and we have OSHA, right, to kind of guide us on that. But right now, we don't have any kind of mandatory code overall that says, like, this is how much ventilation you need to have in a space. There's a recommendation, but there's not anything that mandates it. So we're kind of in that in-between space of like knowing and doing. And I think that we're definitely getting there. But yeah, hopefully doing things like this will help us spread the word about indoor air quality and its importance. And
are there like regular checks that facility managers can ask about or can be aware of when it comes to like, okay, it's been 3 months, maybe we should have our air quality checked, or, aside from also having the monitors set up, but are there like certain, you just said there's nothing that's saying like we should have this. So is there anything that facility managers can do to be proactive about air quality?
Yeah, definitely. Preventative maintenance is probably the number one thing to be done. If you think about the air filters that you use on the HVAC system, those can really help grab a lot of that pollution out of the air when the air moves through it. So using a higher rated filter to pull more of those pollutants out is like the number one thing you can do to help improve indoor air quality. Running the fan as much as possible to keep moving that air through and keep removing the pollutants. But, those filters don't typically get like the viruses and all those smaller things, which is why we recommend using supplemental HEPA filtration, like what we have with our Halo. And it does get those smaller viral size particles out of the air. But if you go back to the HVAC filters, preventative maintenance, if you're changing those filters out on a regular basis, according to the equipment, that's the best place to start. And I think a lot of facility managers think, well, I'll just leave them in a little bit longer and get a little more money out of them. But really, in all reality, when you do that, you're just building up the stuff in the filter, and it's causing that resistance in the airflow. And 80% of the cost of an air filter is the energy it takes to run the air through it. So you're really ending up spending more money on energy trying to move that air through a clogged filter than had to just change the filter pieces. So make sure your equipment works not as hard as well. So that's a great place to start. Again, there's new opportunities with understanding your environment with companies like Poppy, who can do an assessment every 6 months and make sure you're staying on track. And it's an easy process. You don't have to buy any equipment. They just come in and do the assessment, and you can find out, okay, look, I have a troubled area here. Let's get that taken care of. And it's a great way to stay on track, in addition to your IAQ monitors.
You mentioned Poppy a couple of times. So can you talk a little bit about what they do? And I'm not familiar with them or you know.
Yeah. So actually, ErLab is going to be co-partnering with Poppy as a way to come in onto a facility and be your IAQ folks for a healthy indoor environment. And basically, Poppy was created by some folks that were actually on the ASHRAE panel about, mitigating infectious aerosols and trying to find the proper ventilation rates. And they actually had a tool that they were already working with. I had met them a couple of years ago when I was looking at IAQ monitors in education. And at the time, they were using it for finding viruses within the air. And it evolved into a way to track ventilation. And I hope I'm saying all of this right. But basically, it's a science, and it's a system that basically uses an aerosol, and it tracks the aerosol, and the monitors that you put out, it can tell where they came from, where they've been, what size they are, and it can give you a diagnostic of your building, and it can show you overall, like, this area is underventilated, this area is overventilated. You could probably use supplemental HEPA filtration in this area, even after we, adjust dampers and airflow. There's still problem areas. So it's a great way to come in and get a bird's eye view, so to speak, of what's happening ventilation wise, because if you have adequate ventilation, you have healthier air. And they're finding that a lot of places are actually overventilating, and that if you adjust that, you can save a lot of money and energy. Anyway, it's a great tool. It's one that nobody else has. And so it's just a great way to get in there and understand your space and what you need to make air quality better in there.
It definitely sounds like a really good place to start if you're a facility manager and you're like, let me get in there and see just if we have any problem areas, things that we could tweak a little bit, for energy and for the people in your buildings, making sure they, stay well and don't get sick.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. Yeah, very well said.
Do you have any stories or a time where you went in and there was an issue and you solved the challenge, or your company solved the challenge for the person, and you were like, oh, that's a really interesting piece of learning, maybe around COVID, or, something that you've taken through the years that you're like, let's remember that this is something that can happen?
Yeah. I think that overall, I would say in the space of education, again, that's where the majority of my experience is. Typically, educators are not educated in indoor air quality. Like, facility managers are going to have more experience in that area. So trying to talk to folks that don't have any experience in indoor air quality, their experience isn't educating, right? That's probably the biggest challenge. And so helping them understand that, coming in and mitigating, and showing them like there's a better way you can do this, and, reduce your absenteeism numbers, protect your staff, and it's a real aha for them in the sense of like, oh, just small changes can make a big difference. So,
is there any curriculum or any kind of online learning that you found or that you yourself have developed as an educator, to help people in the education space with understanding this?
Yeah, absolutely. We do education all the time. Simply, we've done lunch and learns. Come on in. We'll all have a quick visit about indoor air quality, ask some questions, learn the importance. If you ever want to set up a lunch and learn with your company, we'd be happy to do that. I have a great presentation that just kind of goes through all the things that we really talked about today. But EPA has a great source of information, and I'll provide you with a whole bunch of sources where you can find more information about free learning about
we'll put that in our show notes for sure. That'd be great.
Yeah. So there's lots of places that you can go and get the information. But it's it's really important. Like education is how we learn, and when we learn, we can change. And when we change, sometimes that makes things better. That's the goal, right?
Right. Absolutely. That is the goal.
Yeah.
Always improving.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, do you have anything else that you would like to add to this conversation? Or because I think we've run out of questions that we've had already. But is there anything you'd like to add to this conversation?
Yeah. I mean, I just want to thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And if anyone has questions, they're curious about, their indoor air quality, how to make it better, they can feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to answer their questions. One of my favorite parts about my job is that I get to educate, came from education, come from a family of educators. So I get to do what I love to do in a space that I'm loving to be able to make an impact in. So definitely get in touch with me.
Love it. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that was great. I love all the stuff you said about education and the things about, carpet particles. That's a little scary, but I want to go home and change my filters now. And thanks to Lisa for joining us for a great conversation about air quality, indoor air quality, known as IAQ. And thank you for listening. Please remember to go and change your filter if you haven't done so. You should probably do it at least once a month, and put that on your calendar. Again, we'll have all of the notes and information about ErLab and Lisa and Poppy on our show notes at www.openworksweb.com/thecleanslate. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day. Enjoying the podcast? Leave a review. To otherwise support our podcast, please share and follow us on your favorite streaming platform. You can also visit our website to find show notes and more info on each episode at www.openworksweb.com/podcast. Want to be a guest on an upcoming podcast? Check out the information in the description to apply. We'll see you next time, and remember, keep it clean.